Ladies and gentlemen, are you feeling it? You in the groove? You ready for some server-side tagging? Woohoo! Put your hands together for the one, the only, Simo Ahava!
Thank you. Oh, it's still going on? Nice fade out. Thank you very much for that kind introduction. And hello, everyone. It's really great to be back here in Hungary. It's my first time traveling in 2 years, so I'm really nervous about that in particular. Less so about this talk, because this is about a topic that I've become very familiar with over the last couple of years. I think it's obligatory to talk about COVID when these talks start, so it's been a weird couple of years. Started a company, had a baby, both with the same woman. And yeah, and so we've actually had a pretty good time, and actually Finland itself is quite untouched by COVID. I'll show you a picture which I found from the Twitter feed. This is what social distancing looks like in Finland, and mind you, this is pre-COVID. So when COVID came around and they said you have to have like 6 feet social distancing, Finns were like, that's way too little. that's not enough. So Finland has been doing pretty well, all things considering, and but still it doesn't change the fact that I'm feeling a bit nervous right now. But I'll get to the groove once I start talking about this topic. So 2 years ago, almost to the date, I was on the plane to Budapest for Superweek, and I was frantically, with my 1 hour of Wi-Fi time on the plane, I was frantically pressing reload on the Twitter feed for Superweek because I was expecting Brian Kuhn and Scott Herman to make an announcement because they were talking at that very time that I was on the plane. And I was expecting someone to talk about it. And then Martin actually just tweeted about that, hey, by the way, server-side tagging is coming. Or he didn't say, by the way, he said, wow, server-side tagging is coming. And so I unloaded a couple of tweets right there and then about what I thought about the paradigm. And if you've been following along what I've been writing about over the last couple of years, or just watching social feeds in general, you'll know that I'm pretty excited about it. But it feels like now's a good time to look back. 2 years ago, it was announced. 6 months from that, so 1.5 years ago, it was introduced to beta. And just under 6 months ago, it was released, or the beta label was stripped off to coincide with the release of a couple of advertising stack tags into server-side tagging. So it's 1.5 years since the general public learned about server-side tagging or got to use it. So it's a good time to take a look back and see what it's accomplished and if there are still some gaping holes in the implementation, in the feature itself. So 2 years ago, I wrote a couple of things that I thought about server-side tagging. I listed a couple of things that I was really excited about, listed a couple of things I was looking forward to. Much of the things I talked about had to do with consolidating data streams. So being able to reduce client-side load, being able to reduce the amount of information that's being sent directly from the client to the vendors. And just basically consolidate things, make things flow better, make things flow easier. So that's one of the things I want to take a look back now and see if that's actually been accomplished, or if this is all just wishful thinking. And before I go there, for the benefit of everyone, I think it's also good to establish some terminology and establish what we're talking about. I have no idea if everybody knows about server-side tagging or if it's just some term that they've heard about. So let's just quickly take a look at what we're talking about here. When we talk about server-side tagging, we have to juxtapose it against what isn't server-side tagging, so client-side tagging, so-called regular tagging. And this involves typically a tag manager. It doesn't have to be a tag manager. You can just have vendor JavaScript running on the page itself, running in the browser. And then you have a website that needs to communicate with various endpoints. They can be advertisers, they can be analytics platforms, they can be marketing platforms, they can be databases, whatever you think of, whatever you want to send from the browser outwards. And so when something happens, typically the browser communicates directly with the vendor servers. So there's an HTTP request stream going on. There's a request being sent to servers and then a response being sent back. And now this direct line of communication with the Facebook pixel, with GA, with Google Ads, We kind of take it for granted because that's how it's been going on for years, for decades even. That's how marketing works. You install the Facebook pixel, you install the insert some nasty ad tech, other nasty ad tech vendor pixel, and that's just how it goes. We take it for granted. Data is being sent, and then our reports are being populated. If we take a look at what's actually being sent, is a total freeze. Well, I'll just wing. Oh, here we go. Just needed some love. So first of all, we are typically fetching something from a content distribution network, right? So before we send anything to Facebook, we download their JavaScript. Before we send anything to GA, we download their JavaScript. And same thing for Google Ads. It's quite rare to just directly implement a tracker ping using an image tag, for example. It's typical to download JavaScript. And when you download JavaScript from a third-party vendor, you basically give it full privilege to act on the browser. There's some propositions going on with browsers like Brave where it would be possible to isolate third-party JavaScript from first-party JavaScript. So be able to kind of build a membrane between these vendor layers and the site itself, but it hasn't come to fruition yet. So right now, when you install the Facebook JavaScript or the Google Analytics JavaScript or whatever on the site, on the page, by loading the CDN, through the CDN, you are basically giving that JavaScript full rights to do whatever it likes. You can prevent it with some content security policies, you can prevent it with some imaginative client-side hacks, but the vast majority of cases, the long tail of sites implementing these things are giving full access. So that's one problem. The other problem is this whole discussion around e-privacy, around personal data, around persistence, around data transfers, around just basically using the user's browser or terminal device as a store for identifiers without the user explicitly being able to choose how, when, and where those identifiers are dropped. So the JavaScript running in the browser, it just doesn't build those analytics in it. It actually introduces persistence. It has to, because one kind of unfortunate for analytics and advertising, one unfortunate feature of the web is that it's stateless. You know, what happens on one page doesn't follow you to the next page, so we need cookies, we need browser storage, we need stateful mechanisms to persist that information from one page to the next. But the problem is that we are also persisting information that the user doesn't necessarily have any say in. They might not want an identifier to be attached to them. But because of the ubiquitousness of cookies and how easy they are to use as an API, this has become a de facto standard of the web. And it's in large populated by these vendor JavaScript libraries. And now I'm just talking about first-party storage. Some of these libraries also make use of third-party storage, such as third-party cookies, or URL decoration, which are a whole different class of problems, also currently raising a ruckus in the web because of how browsers are trying to suffocate those. These are all relics of the direct communication between the vendor and the browser. Cross-site tracking, I don't know what that is. Cross-site tracking ensues. That's what follows when you have these identifiers. That's what follows when Facebook is able to follow you from one site to the next. And if you've been following what the Brave browser does, if you're familiar with intelligent tracking prevention from WebKit, you'll know that cross-site tracking in particular is the one thing they're trying to get rid of. Of course, they are throwing a lot of babies out with the bathwater as they're doing that, but cross-site tracking is the key term. That's what they want to prevent. That's what most browsers, Google Chrome including, assuming you believe their marketing spiel, believe to be the biggest problem of the advertising complex at the moment when it comes to client-side mechanisms. Then we have a pretty new thing, or definitely not new, but a very good wake-up call recently, and I'm sure you've been talking about this over here, but data transfer laws add a whole new thing to this. When the browser is communicating with Facebook, it's enough that it's communicating the IP address. It's enough that it's communicating some payload parameter that you never thought would be personal data. But if the courts decide it is personal data, you are violating data transfer laws in the act of sending that data to Facebook or to any other I'm talking particularly about EU to US transfers. There are other types of data transfer, of course, and they might be illegal as well. Who knows? It's so difficult to follow the narrative these days. There are some, communicating directly with endpoint opens the door for cross-site scripting attacks. If there's a takeover of the domain you're communicating with, Facebook and Google typically don't have this problem, but then there's a long tail of advertisers who might not take as good care of their properties. And then there are, of course, from analytics, we are very familiar with PII leaks. So whenever there's a haphazard email address in the page URL, you can rest assured that it's being leaked to every single one of the marketing vendors running on the page. So again, regular tagging has its uses. I'm not saying it's a deprecated technology. There are very many uses for it. The time to market with them might be really fast. And it's basically zero cost when it comes to implementation. But these are some of the artifacts that follow when you opt into such a mechanism. So what does server-side tagging solve? Juxtaposed against this, we still have a website. We still have marketing vendors. We still have partners that need this information. But instead of sending data directly to the vendors, server-side tagging introduces a midpoint, a middleman, an intermediary that intercepts the data stream from the browser before forwarding it to the vendors. And crucially, this green block here, by the way, I mentioned this to Krista and Daniel over lunch, but the more years I do this, the uglier my slides get. And I think I've overdone myself this year, and you're going to be in for a treat. There are some really hideous slides here, but the green block reminded me that I have to mention this. So there's no drop shadow, nothing, it's just a green block. So importantly, the server container would be owned by the same entity that owns the website. So it's in a first-party relationship, both in a technical way, because it's running in a subdomain of the website, but also in an organizational way. It's not a given, but that's typically how it's done. So what does the server container give you? Well, it lets you validate the hit in real time. When the browser sends the hit to the server container, before the hit is forwarded to the vendors, you can validate it. You can remove parameters, you can update parameters, you can purge PII, you can enrich the hit. Kind of a classic example that I used to use when universal analytics was still a thing, but based on the previous talk, it probably isn't going to be a thing for a long time. The universal analytics has the event data model and the event value field, which takes an integer. It takes a number as the parameter. If you send a string, what happens? Who knows? If you send, let's say, Simo as the event value of an event, yeah, the hit gets dropped. It's not just that the event value is not, so the entire hit gets dropped. And oh boy, have I had situations where event value has been populated as another dimension, because value doesn't necessarily entail a metric. So with server-side tagging, you can nip those in the bud. You can look for a specific manipulation. You look for, is there a non-number as event value? If so, let's turn it to 0, for example, or drop it from the hit. So this is the kind of classic fixing the hit before it leaves. It's a staple in tools like Snowplow and other more hands-on data management platforms. So server-side tagging gives you that possibility at ingestion time. Consolidation of streams I already mentioned, so it lets you, instead of sending a hit to Facebook, a hit to Google Ads, a hit to Google Analytics, you just send a single request to the server, and then that sends it forward. So you're reducing the amount of bandwidth and computation required by the client. Anonymization, a really topical thing, again, because of these data transfer laws. With a server container, nothing identifying of the user must be leaked to the vendor. IP address is typically very difficult to change because you need a proxy, or you need a VPN, or you need something, you need to opt into something. With a server container, if you choose, you can drop the user's IP address. It doesn't have to be anywhere visible. The only thing that the vendor sees is the server container's IP address. So it's the ultimate democratization of personal data, because now everybody is the server container. The machine's won. You can drop, you can drop other stuff from it. You can drop the Google client ID. You can hash it, randomize it, salt it. So you can treat the payload to be more compliant. Consent management, I'll just skip that for now. Client-side performance, very important, of course. So reducing the amount of work that the browser has to do will improve performance. Fewer JavaScript libraries need to be downloaded. Fewer content security policies need to be relaxed. Fewer hits need to be sent from the browser. This is a best case scenario, of course. There are ways to do this really badly as well. And then there's this idea of tracking protection, which has to do with well, how should I phrase this? Because I know that this is a very favorite topic for many, but has to do with using the server-side tagging proxy for circumventing ad blockers, for circumventing intelligent tracking prevention by elongating the expiration of cookies or the lifetime of cookies. So server container gives you these mechanisms that let you sometimes kind of screw the user over by disobeying their wishes about using an ad blocker. I feel very strongly about it if you haven't noticed yet. But also lets you treat cookies in a way that, for example, Safari and WebKit browsers don't get into a hissy fit over, which I think is a perfectly valid way to do it. So anyway, these are kind of the benefits of using a server container when compared with regular tagging. Now, the crux of the matter is that these are all kind of positive things, or they can be portrayed in a positive light. A server container also gives you amazing tools, like so much cloud muscle, so much scale, to do the dirtiest, black-hattedest things you can think of without the browser ever being aware of them, without auditors ever being aware of them. And I'll show you just how to do those here. Before we finally get to the actual presentation, well, one other thing I want to mention is the data flow taxonomy. And I don't think this is, well, it's just something I conjured when Jim Gordon, another Superweek resident, wrote an article and asked for some ideas about this, and I shared with him off the cuff some taxonomies, and in retrospect, I thought I was pretty clever. So we have the client-to-vendor stream. This is regular tagging. This is when the browser or the device communicates directly with the vendor. This is the business-as-usual way of doing tagging. This is how most vendors still want you to do it, especially if they need third-party cookies, because third-party cookies necessarily require a client. They necessarily require a browser to be in the midst. We have server-to-vendor streams. This would be, let's say, measurement protocol sending requests directly to Google Analytics. This would be your CRM forwarding information to another database. This would be, whatever has a server as the starting point. It doesn't necessarily have a client anywhere. A user is just a row in the CRM, a user ID that made a transaction, and then this is shipped directly to the vendor. This has never been as popular as you would think, partly because building the infrastructure requires developers, it requires work. There are some SaaS systems out there that specialize in this, but still, vendors aren't too excited about this because they lose the ability to track you in the client or in the browser. Then we have the client to server to vendor, the CSV, if you will. And this is what server-side tagging prototypically is. We have a browser communicating with the server owned by the company or the website, and then forwarding the information to the vendor. And I don't have any data to back this up, but I'm kind of looking forward to this becoming the norm more than anything else. Then we have a bit rarer, but server to vendor. So again, server-side tagging works in this, but instead of having the client as the first stop, we could have measurement protocol as the originator. Now, why would you do that? Why would you have measurement protocol or some other server-to-server call stop in a server-side tagging environment before forwarding to the vendors? Why not go with server-to-vendor directly? We'll take audience participation at a later time, my friend. It's because this is also a data ingestion system. It's not just a proxy. Remember that you can use this to split the data stream to multiple different endpoints. This is only privy to Google. It's only measurement protocol communicating with Google. This lets you take measurement protocol, send it to Google, but also send it to Facebook, send it to other vendors. So server-side tagging isn't only about shuffling those client-side hits, even though intuitively that's what we think it is for, because it has the words tag management. And tag management is a client-side phenomenon, or has been for so long. And then we have just one more weird one, and I'm kind of happy that it's way below the eye level, but we have client to server to vendor with a detour of client to vendor. Let me explain. Or who knows what this is?
Google Ads conversion tracker?
Yeah, Google Ads, or how Google Ads works in server-side tagging. So we have a conversion event happening in the device. It communicates with the server-side endpoint saying, hey, a conversion event happened. The server-side endpoint sends the data to Google Ads servers. A conversion happened with this GCL ID and so on. But it also sends a message in the response back to the browser that, hey, would you mind stopping by DoubleClick on your way home? Right, so the response from the server instructs the browser to make a request to DoubleClick servers. Now, why would it do that? Because of third-party cookies. They are written on the DoubleClick domain. If you recall from earlier, third-party cookies require a browser. So for Google to make those third-party cookies available for them, they need the browser to communicate with DoubleClick. So I'm not thrilled about this mechanism. It seems like a kind of a cheap way to achieve what Google is trying to do. At the same time, I don't see them using the privacy sandbox yet, which is the kind of the replacement that Google is planning for third-party cookies. I don't see them going the Facebook route with a pure conversions API type approach, at least not until privacy sandbox is fully formed. So I kind of understand it, but I still don't understand it. So just look at the colors that I've chosen. It's so vomity. It's seizure-inducing. Yeah, so we have, these all covered in this flag. It's all server-side tagging, potentially. Now you might wonder, there's a laser here? No, that's not a laser. You might wonder how a server-side tagging endpoint could be the first step, how it could be the origin. That's a good question. I'd love to know how that would work, but I don't see it as an impossible option. It's entirely possible that server-side tagging itself could initiate data flows, especially once it comes to kind of top of the funnel in the data ingestion pipeline. Monitoring, self-monitoring, automatically creating some events, pulling information from APIs and so on. Anyway, that's the premise. That's what server-side tagging is looking like today. And now, to take a look at over the last 1.5 years, let's see what it's accomplished. And if it's managed to turn into what I grandiosely call a paradigm shift in our industry, because, and spoiler alert, I don't think it has, but it's getting close. I have 6 things I want to talk about. I have portability, and I'm going to be fast. Don't worry that there's 6. I'm going to be pretty fast. There's portability, there's the data stream consolidation, there's opaqueness, there's onboarding, community, and potential. Sorry, Robert, I was too fast. Portability is the first one that I want to talk about. This is where we started. We have an app engine automatic provisioning system built into server-side tagging. And it is extremely easy to set up. You do not have to write a single line of code. You do not have to visit the Google Cloud Console. You click, install Google Tag Manager, automatically provision a server. Okay, you do have to visit GCP if you don't have a billing account or if you don't have a cloud project, but it's a completely guided onboarding tour. So getting up and running with a cloud infrastructure at scale is super easy with server-side tagging. But if this were it would be pretty depressing because App Engine is not the perfect platform. App Engine Standard, which this relies on, is not suitable for production use. So when you go through the install Google Tag Manager route, automatically provision a server, you're just using it to kick the tires around a little, test the waters, figure out if server-side tagging is good for you. It's not suitable for a production setup. Instead, now that the deployment has been opened up using Docker, which is a container system for the cloud specifically, but on-premise as well, we can deploy server-side tagging in AWS, we can deploy it in Azure, we can deploy it on-premise, we can deploy it in Cloud Run, we can deploy it wherever we like where Docker is able to run. And Docker can run in a zillion different systems these days. Using the classic example, yes, it is possible to install server-side tagging in your smart refrigerator. And this is, so we are constantly ramping up. There's more and more solutions coming around that don't rely on App Engine anymore. And that's great. And Cloud Run specifically, I'm going to talk more about Cloud Run, so let me just skip over this. Data stream consolidation, and again, this is art. So before we had the client communicating with 3 separate vendors directly, right? Facebook, Google, Criteo, whatever you can think of. With server-side tagging, we still have those 3 data streams, but they go through the GTM server. And yes, these are opposite colors in the spectrum, so they really jump out. And So this is one way to do it, but it's not perfect because you still have 3 data streams leaving the browser. And when you work with server-side, when you work with Google Cloud, you pay for network egress. And that means the outgoing communications from the server. So you pay 1, 2, 3, that's 3 network egress costs, and you pay 1, 2, 3, not for the request, but the response back to the browser. So requests cost nothing, ingress is 0 cost. But unfortunately for HTTP, each request needs to be responded with a response, so you pay for the responses. So this is not perfect, you're still paying for network egress far too much. When you consolidate those 3 outbound streams to just 1, you reduce your network egress costs by 33%. Thank you. And some decimals. So you are paying 1, 2, 3, 4 instead of 6, right? And of course the other benefits of data stream consolidation. We're not there quite yet with data stream. This applies. This is true. This graph, hideous as it is absolutely true. However, with this was the moment where I found transitions in Keynote. So we know there are measurable gains in client-side performance. We know that. It's a fact. When you don't download the Facebook library, or instead use the GA4 stream, the existing GA4 stream, to also send data to Facebook, you are not exerting that cost on the client side anymore. Facebook is no more in the browser. It's measurable, it's immediate, and it's absolute fact. With a Google Cloud Platform or Amazon or Azure or whatever you want to use, you have more scale and power than anything you could ever imagine the user's browser doing. This is kind of like, how crypto mining could do it, They want to run in the browser because that's the easiest way to do it, but of course if they want to do it at scale, they would have to go to the cloud. I don't know why I brought up crypto. It's been top of mind lately. So you just have a lot more power to do all this kind of consolidation, all this enhancement in the cloud. That's what cloud is built for in a way, for scale and for power. You can leverage a single well-known client-side tech for creating the stream. Now this is a euphemism for GA4 at the moment. Whether that's fortunate or unfortunate is up to you to decide. However, server-side tagging is extremely connected with GA4. The entire semantics of it are built around GA4. There are certain benefits with using GA4, especially if you want to do advertising and remarketing, and in the future consent mode as well. And GA4 is, like, if you are running GA4 right now and you want to move to server-side, that's the kind of data stream you want to focus on, not universal and not anything else. I personally have been vouching for someone to create a small, slim client-side library whose only job is to create a simple event model, send it to the server, and then have the server forward it. Like super small, like almost no overhead at all. Maybe something forked off Snowplow or something similar, but we're not there yet. So this is again just the benefit of consolidation. We have improved security. You need fewer content security policy exceptions. You're able to catch data leaks, data breaches before they happen, before they ship to the vendors in the best case scenarios. It's not perfect, but it does give you the opportunity to do so. You have more control over what the vendors receive, and this is absolutely true as well. You get to choose what Facebook collects. You get to choose what Google collects. If you're using their tags, of course, it's possible that you'll still be hoodwinked. They can sell you the promise of more data by adding all this stuff. But you have the control, compared with the JavaScript library where you don't have that control. When you download it from the Facebook servers, that's it. You've just given Facebook the key to your site, and they can pretty much do whatever type of data collection they like. And enrichment, so this is the idea that you collect a stream from GA4, but it's not perfect for Facebook, so then you pull APIs and pull information from your CRM within the server. Eventually that will be possible. And I can kind of give you a hint that there would be a big NDA label on top of that last thing for the next couple of weeks. So hopefully we'll see some improvements there very, very soon. About then the cons, there's the Vegas rule, which I'm going to come to very quickly, very shortly. I'll just leave it dangling there as a kind of a hint. The client-side stream currently needs to encode all the information for the different vendors. If you want to use GA4 to send data to Facebook, you need to add the Facebook-specific information into the GA4 stream. That's not pretty. You need to add the Facebook click ID, the FBP ID. You need to add external ID, content IDs. You need to add all that stuff because you can't yet do those manipulations in the server unless somebody builds a template for it. And even then, if you don't send the FBP value, then, well, actually you can generate that, so that's a bad example. But if you don't send the FBC, the click ID, then you just don't have that information. So it gets pretty ugly when you have a simple page view hit to GA4, but it has like 1,500 different things for 1,500 different vendors in the server. It's not pretty. So you're actually exerting pressure on the client again, more performance loss. This is a huge thing, and I'm going to return to it in very shortly, but auditing is a huge problem. This is the opaqueness problem. This is the Vegas rule again. Not all vendors support server-to-server, which is weird because they have servers that you send data to, so why don't they allow access to those servers? Mostly it's because of the third-party cookie problem. And so many vendors are unable to look for an alternative because they don't have any alternative. And they just haven't formalized a proper server-to-server protocol that would be secure and safe to use. That's an unfortunate reality. And then there's a lack of standardization for the event data model itself. So consolidating data stream relies on the incoming data stream being able to be parsed into a fairly standardized format. Event name would always be a certain way. There would always be a certain type of page location parameter, user ID, client ID. They would all be part of the payload and the clients. There is a model that Google proposes, but it's missing a lot of bits and pieces. It's not perfect. And it's a model that Google decided on. It wasn't a model built by the community, so you might disagree with it. So there just isn't an imposed standard yet. And enrichment isn't really possible. Again, NDA, and there's hopefully going to be something about that very soon. So then the Vegas rule. So this is what happens in the server stays in the server. And this is the main benefit of server-side tagging in a way. You're able to utilize the full power and scale of a Google Cloud infrastructure or AWS. But what happens as a consequence is that everything from the client to the server, the HTTP request and what happens in the browser, that can be audited. That's visible to the browser. You can see a data stream leaving the browser. You can see it. If you're worried about consent, you can look at the parameters sent with that request and compare those with your cookies. And if there's a match, you know that the site isn't respecting your consent. They're reading data from the cookies. This can be audited. Everything that happens from the server on cannot be audited, at least not in the same way that you would audit a web browser. You can't just open your developer tools and plug into the server and look what's going on. You have to kind of believe. I don't know if believe is the right word. You have to trust. I don't know if trust is the right word. No, I don't think that's the right word either. You have to blindly and gullibly, imagine that they are respecting your options. And before, you only had to trust or believe, or whatever the word is, that the vendors are doing right by you. But now you also have to trust or believe, or whatever, that the site is doing right by you. This isn't new. Every single server log you send to our website servers, they can do whatever they want with that data without telling you. It's not like this is a completely new thing. But this opaqueness is just magnified by the fact that server-side tagging relies on this idea that you are moving complexity from the browser to the server. So the server is taking more and more on. And while it's a great thing, the problem is that we are losing visibility. And we are adding more and more requirements for the kind of stupid fluff that you see on websites these days, such as privacy policies and cookie disclaimers and processor lists and how to do data access. And I'm not saying they're stupid because they're bad things to have. I'm saying they're stupid because companies actually think that these are their way out. Just that they're having a privacy policy or a list of cookies that they're suddenly compliant. Especially this last part, how do you comply with data access requests or data removal requests when you're taking on more and more in a server container that doesn't necessarily support these types of things? So this is this has been a big pet peeve of mine from the beginning. This is a huge problem with server-side tagging, and it's an innocent problem in a way. It's necessitated by how the client-server architecture of the web works. It's not like Google decided to hide everything in the cloud from the browser. It's just how the server works. So what's the solution? How do we add transparency? Well, these are one way of doing it. Obviously, if you are taking a Google Analytics data stream and you're sending it to Facebook, even though you're not sending it to the Facebook from the client, you still need a legal basis to send the information to Facebook, right? You still need permission. You still need a lawful reason to do it. And for some reason, and I'm not saying anybody in this room or anybody in this country even or anybody in this continent, but for some reason, some people are thinking that somehow this absolves them of that the browser has always been the crux of the problem, and that's just not true. The data flows don't care about that technique, about the technology. They just care about that the user's data is being protected in a good manner. And it doesn't help that we have things like ePrivacy Directive being a bit of shambles with all the different interpretations. But it's just the way. So how do we fix this? I don't know. What I would like to see, which is kind of impossible and a pipe dream, but some way to standardize a mechanism where the server responds back to the browser and tells them what happened, tells the browser what happened, what vendor endpoints were communicated with, how many requests were sent, what information was sent with those requests. So why is this kind of impossible? Well, it's an incredibly added cost to this because, again, it's network egress traffic. It has a lot of unnecessary information. The browser doesn't need to know everything. The browser then needs a mechanism to read this information, maybe a browser API. If we want a browser API, it's going to take 5 years to see that. Maybe a browser extension. But some way of having some sort of standardized communication path to see what goes on in the server. I don't know. This is just a hope. This is your wishful thinking. But until this opaqueness problem is solved, server-side tagging does have a problem, and it's not going to shake it off very easily. About onboarding. So before, we started with the automatically provisioning a tagging server, and then when you wanted to upgrade to the production version with App Engine, you would run a shell script, which is kind of easy to run, but you need to go to the cloud console first and run some things, run a shell, and then use this beautiful command line interface. So it's quite a big, heavy task, and you still end up with just App Engine. App Engine is really old tech. Like it's really, really old tech in internet years. It's not serverless. It's running on compute engine instances. It's running on virtual machines in the cloud. It has a lot of overhead. You always pay for those instances. So what's the competition? Well, Cloud Run is what I hope, really, really hope that Google Tag Manager moves to natively very soon. I would imagine they would have moved ages ago, but Cloud Run was still kind of unfinished when they released server-side tagging, and it was still in beta for a very long time, and it still has a lot of unpolished corners. But with Cloud Run, so Cloud Run is a serverless container platform running on Google Cloud. So instead of whipping up virtual machine 1, virtual machine 2, virtual machine 3, it uses computation and memory rented across different machines and distributed evenly. So you end up with a system where Cloud Run actually can only use the resources that are on demand. So if your endpoint is not receiving any requests, Cloud Run has zero computation, zero memory use. Then when those requests are coming in, it starts firing them, it starts doing those cold boots. Whereas App Engine doesn't have a scale to zero with App Engine Flexible. If you're getting 0 requests, you're still paying for your instances. You're paying for the minimum number of instances. And if each instance costs $40, you're paying at least $40 USD every month, even if you have 0 traffic. Now, that might sound like nothing, but you are paying $40 USD. Cloud Run isn't perfect yet. App Engine has a great feature where it automatically compresses files. So when you download the Google Tag Manager container through App Engine, or analytics.js or GTag, it automatically compresses it. So it's great because it reduces the size from 200 kilobytes to 60 or 50 kilobytes. Cloud Run doesn't have this. It doesn't have an automatic compression system. You need to install a reverse proxy in front of the Cloud Run server, which is, again, totally doable, but it is an additional step. Or you need to hope that Google Tag Manager team introduces a native compression system. But then again, that increases the computation demands for the Cloud Run endpoint. So this is an unsolved problem, and a problem that needs to be fixed because so many companies are already offloading their JavaScripts to run from their server-side tagging endpoint rather than directly from the vendors. App Engine has some helpful details automatically added to the response. So they do, IP address geolocation. So they automatically resolve your IP address to a geolocation, which might be useful in some cases. They do proxy traversal, so they return all the IP addresses in a chain rather than just the last one and so on. Cloud Run doesn't yet have anything like this. Maybe these will also be configurable at some point. Then we have this question of cost. So I don't have the data. I'm relying on an article by Mark Edmondson where he posits that Cloud Run is probably cost efficient when you're running fewer than 100 million requests per month. So even for large websites, Cloud Run will be a whole lot cheaper and lower latency than App Engine. But when those requests go past the 100 million mark, 200, 300, 400 million, then App Engine is probably going to be a bit more efficient. So we're still looking for the sweet spots there. App Engine is single region. A region is very important in the cloud because that determines how much your network costs are going to be. If your server-side tagging endpoint is running in the US and most of your traffic is from India, it's a long geographical distance. And you might think that what has geographical distance got to do with it computing? Well, it has a whole lot to do because that's where the costs come. If your bulk of your traffic is from the US, you want your server to run in the US. If bulk of your traffic is in the EU, you want your server to run in the EU. App Engine is single region. With Cloud Run, it's trivial to set up multiple regions. One server or one stack of services for the EU, one for APAC, one for US. And then you set up a load balancer in front to choose which ones to send them. This is totally doable with Cloud Run. App Engine is an established technology with a lot of support, a lot of case studies, and a lot of guides, whereas Cloud Run is still up and coming. So we don't know what the status quo will be, but hopefully we're going to see a native integration soon. And to help you out, if you want to try Cloud Run, I've written a shell script that you can run in your Google Cloud project, whichever one you like, and it will basically install Cloud Run server-side tagging for you without you having to worry about building those servers yourself. As far as community goes, it's still a bit meh. We have 47 templates in the template gallery for a server. We have 0 client templates yet. People have built them, yes, but they're not released to the gallery for whatever reason. So we're still looking forward to having the big deluge of marketing endpoints and server-side setups here.
APA also, client APA.
Yeah, APIs as well. And then as far as potential, well, I'm going to have you indulge me with my little wish list here. And this is going to be the end of this talk. First, I want to see asynchronous enrichment. This means that I want to send a tag, or I want to send a hit to the server-side endpoint. And I want the server-side endpoint to take the hit, pause it while it pulls in data from different APIs, adds them to the hit, and then sends it to the vendors. So I want to do enrichment in the server. I don't want to send the data back to the browser, then send it back to the server, then send it back to the browser, and so on. So I want an asynchronous way to run this. I want to be able to pause a thread and do these things and then return. Insert NDA badge there again. Hopefully we'll see something very soon. Native Cloud Run deployment, I already gushed about this. I want to see this soon. So when you click automatically provision tagging server, it does it in Cloud Run, not in App Engine. More Google Cloud APIs. We now have BigQuery. We have write and read, but technically we have write. You don't want to do extensive read operations with BigQuery in real time. It's not a good transactional database for that. I want to see Firestore. I want to see easier pub/sub integration. I want to see cloud functions. You can already do those with HTTP requests, but built-in templates for those. And maybe some optimization, maybe some caching, maybe some header adding. I want to see client templates in the gallery ASAP. I have no idea why they're still holding back on that one. I want more control over what the event data object. So the event data object is what is created from the incoming data stream. Let's say you send a Google Analytics hit to the server container. The event data object is the standardized semantic model built from that hit. But it's created by the clients. Once a client creates it, you can't modify it anymore. If you're unhappy with how it makes some certain mapping, you can't change it. So I would like for there to be a way for me to decide what the final shape of the event data object is. Transparency controls for client-side audits. So this was another thing that I already gushed about. I want something here. I want some solution to this. And it might be something we have to create as a community. I don't know. So get your thinking caps on because we're going to do it tonight. Clear documentation how server-side GTM actually works. There's a whole lot of stuff going on in the network requests. Requests are being sent for something called server.js. There's a get memo request going on in debug mode. There are blue-green deployments all over the place. And the server-side tagging documentation is pretty good, but it could be better. More transparency to built-in clients and tags. They have a custom template model. Why can't they open the built-in clients and tags with that? Why can't we open them and see what goes on inside? What do they have to hide? Ooh. I don't know. I would just like to know how they work, and I want similar controls to other APIs that we use. More granular consent controls, so being able to conditionally set cookies depending not just on consent mode, which we could have a whole another hour or a bit more talking about what my beef is with that. But also flagging event data object items as sensitive. I want to be able to say that depending on consent, never ever allow touching this email address in the event data object. I want those kinds of controls that a modern data stack needs, especially one that purports to be compliant with different regulations. And then just more documentation and tools for overall cloud project management. You know, how to do load balancing, how to serve multi-region setups. Maybe even throw a bone to Amazon and Azure and show how to optimize those as well. It's not a way from Google to show how that's done because their stack is still running there. Anyway, this was my wish list, and finally we reach, oh, sorry, I am here to sell. So if server-side tagging is interesting, we at Team Simmer have a discount for you, running until the end of this week. So no coupon codes or anything. We have a 10% off our birthday week. It's been 1 year since we published server-side tagging. So we have server-side tagging, and we also have a new course, Web Browsers and Tracking Protections, available as a bundle offer on teamsimmer.com. That's teamsimmer.com. Thank you very much.
Hip, hip. Hip, hip. Hip, hip.